Okay, let's go into the supply curve now. And you won't be too surprised, I think, after the last couple of lectures to show that I'm going to show that even if I pretend that the market demand curve is sound, the supply curve is not. So I've shown that you can't describe an individual as a utility maximizer. You can't derive a downward sloping market demand curve from individuals even if they were utility maximizers. Now you can't even derive a supply curve even if there is a downward sloping market demand curve. So what you get out of this is there ain't no theory. There is no sound theory of neoclassical economics. But that was actually something which people were saying back in 1953. So much so that Milton Friedman argued realism doesn't matter. He said, don't worry about the assumptions. Now, this paper, imagine this paper being written 60 years ago, which means just a few years after the Second World War, 1945, 1953. And this theory was only put together in many ways by Paul Samuelson starting about 1948. Because Samuelson's textbook was his PhD thesis. And I think the first edition was published in 1948. So within a few years of that, people were criticising the theory as unrealistic. Which is an idea of how long people have been injecting this stuff. And what Samuelson said, well, what Friedman said in defending the theory was, look, there's research out there showing that firms don't consciously equate marginal cost and marginal revenue. Ignore it. Doesn't matter, because even if the firms say they're not doing it consciously, unless they were doing it unconsciously, they wouldn't be successful firms. So therefore, you don't need to ask firms what they do. All you need to say is they behave as if they're doing this, and you'll still be right. So realism doesn't matter. And it's called the as-if defense. So what he said was that there were theoretical papers you could read, or empirical papers you could read by people like Eitman, Guthrie, what's called the Oxford Research Group. Who else was there? Dozens of people. I've forgotten all the names straight off. But plenty of research to show that firms don't actually work out marginal cost and marginal revenue and don't equate the two. That's not how they decide how much to produce. But Friedman said, well, what about billiard players? Imagine you're trying to explain why a really good billiard player can sink the ball so well. You could actually hypothesize that they were solving Newton's equations to make the calculations where to hit the ball and knowing where it will spin to and so on. Now we know they don't do that. But unless they were doing something very similar, they wouldn't be sinking the billiard balls. So we can describe what they do using Newton's equations, even though we know they're not solving those equations. Okay? Reasonable? Yeah. At a first pass, that's a pretty reasonable defense of an unrealistic theory. He said, therefore, if you can treat billiard players that way, why not treat the firms the same way? But even though we know they don't consciously do it, unless they were effectively doing the same thing as working out marginal cost and marginal revenue and reducing where the two are equal, they wouldn't be maximising profits. So it's a strong defense of why you shouldn't bother working out what firms actually do. You can work it out anyway. So you don't need to ask billiard players how they manage to sink the ball. You just know that if they weren't obeying Newton's equations, they wouldn't be sinking the ball. Therefore, they're doing as if they're following those equations. Now, the intriguing thing is, when Friedman wrote that paper back in 1953, again, there may have been a dozen computers worldwide, and people weren't doing simulations, but now we can do it. So we can test and see how Milton's hypothesis works out. Let's imagine we have a bunch of firms that I call instrumentally rational profit maximizers, meaning they're simply trying to find the maximum profit using a very simple algorithm. They're not doing calculus. They're not working out marginal cost and marginal revenue. They're simply choosing some random amount which to produce initially, choosing an equally random amount to vary output by, vary the output, and if profit rises, they keep on moving in the same direction. If profit falls, they reverse direction. That's all they're doing. There's no calculus going on. But if you think about it, if this strategy should be able to identify the point of maximum profit. So all the firms are doing it. They each choose a different amount to produce by initially. They each vary their output by a different amount. If the profit rises, they keep on. So if one firm's like reducing output by 27 units each iteration, then if profit rises, it'll drop by another 27. But if profit falls, next time it'll increase by 27. That's all they're doing. Let's see what happens. Do they behave the way Milton Friedman said they will? Here's the model. I start with straight old linear downward sloping market demand curve, quadratic rising marginal cost, and marginal revenue is just the derivative of price times quantity, which is going to be A minus 2 times Q times B. Used to doing all that stuff in micro. Okay. And I'm giving parameter values that give me nice big quantities. I find it really annoying when I read the textbooks and find that things like Mankiw has an example of a lemonade stand producing 12 units and, you know, nonsense amounts like that. I want something serious here. So here's my parameters for my demand curve and my marginal cost curves, and I get something massive like this. So with zero output, the price would be 800. With output of 4 billion, yeah, 4,000 million. The price would be 400. With output of 8,000 million, the price would be 0. So straight old demand curve. There's the prediction for a monopoly output. There's the prediction for competitive firms. Now I'm going to test it with a computer program and have exactly those demand and supply functions facing each firm. And I'm setting up the marginal costs of the individual firms so they aggregate to the same marginal cost curve I'm using for the entire economy. There's a trick there as well. I haven't gone into the detail there. I do it in a research paper. But I'm going to start off that way and say, okay, let's do it for 1 firm and then 2 firms and 3 firms out to 100 and see what happens. Does anybody here write computer programs? Anybody at all? No one. Okay. This is a very simple computer program in a language called MathCAD. And what it does, it starts with a monopoly and goes out to a duopoly and then 100 firms. So that first thing says, starting with 1 firm, going out to 100, step through this process. And the initial thing it does is works out initial output level for each firm. And that little bit there says, choose the output level for each firm as a randomly distributed number, somewhere between the prediction that the neoclassical theory makes, which is this one here, QC at I, and this one QK at I, which is my prediction. So it's somewhere between what I predict and what the conventional theory predicts. And then work out the price that applies, given that initial output level. So there's your initial price level. Then each firm chooses a random amount to vary its output by, which can be up or down. The way I've got it happening here is that the amount they produce varies, is a mean of 0, and the standard deviation is 1% of the conventional prediction of what the output level of the whole firm would be. So the prediction was for, say, 100 firms, and the output level would be 1 million units. Then the mean variation is 0. The standard deviation is 10,000 units. So 65% will produce between their variation amount will be between +1 and -1 standard deviation. 95% between +2 and 1 and -2. 99.7% between +3 and -3, distributed around the percentage of the standard prediction. Then, for a number of iterations, that's what the runs bit there does, you work out the new amount that's produced, given all those variations. It can be up, can be down at the aggregate level. Work out the new price that applies. And then this bit says, each firm then takes a look what happened to its profit. So it's checking whether profit has risen or fallen. And the profit is simply calculated by price times quantity minus the total cost of producing that amount from the previous iteration and the current iteration. And they work out, has profit gone up or down? If profit goes up, they continue moving in the same direction. If profit goes down, they reverse direction. And then you return and see what all the amounts are for the entire output. So does that sound pretty reasonable? And I'm going to simulate that. And here's the, and see where the output converges to for each of the theories. Now, the theory is predicting, of course, that the more firms, the higher the output level. And in particular, the monopoly price will be less, output will be less and price higher than a competitive industry. So here's the predictions we're looking at. There's a monopoly prediction that's actually numerically calculated what the monopoly would produce according to neoclassical theory. And there's a prediction for 100 profit maximising firms, each of which is setting its own marginal cost equal to its own marginal revenue. I'm predicting the same output level, regardless of how many firms are in the industry, and I'm predicting it's going to be there. So, let's have a simulation. Now, this first simulation is the quantities. There's the neoclassical prediction, there's my prediction, and the 10 little dots are 10 randomly chosen firms showing the amount each of them is producing as well. And the average is the blue line, the blue dot, which is, as you can see, converging along this line with my prediction, not the neoclassical prediction. So that doesn't look so crash hot with the theory. So the firms are producing a smaller amount on average than the theory predicts. But maybe they're making a smaller profit. You know, that's supposed to be a profit maximizing output level. They're producing a different amount. Maybe they're not actually maximizing profits. Let's check and see what happens to their profit levels. Well, the top line is my prediction of their profit, which is higher than the neoclassical, as you can see. Blue's the average, and those are all the various levels. Somebody's actually getting a lower profit than the neoclassical prediction, but all the others that I'm showing the 10 samples out of the 100 are making a higher profit, and the average profit is much higher than the neoclassical level. There's something really wrong with the theory, because not only are they producing, what had happened there? Resume slideshow, pardon me. Not only are they producing a lower amount, they're making more money. So there's something seriously wrong with the neoclassical prediction. So they don't equate marginal cost and marginal revenue. I've proven that. And they make a higher profit. And there's no difference between a competitive industry and a monopoly. There's the outcome, there's the theory rather. Those are the predictions. That was the outcome. The blue, the little red, the little orange square there, the hollow square, is where the monopoly produced. The dot is where the 100 firms produced. So there's no impact on the number of firms and the output level. Again, the red line is the neoclassical prediction of output. The blue line is my prediction. That's the outcome of 100 simulations, each with between 1 and 100 firms in them, converging around what I predicted. Yeah? Pardon? Yes, it is, but they're not supposed to be behaving like Nash individuals. They're not even considering what the other firms are doing. Actually, no, pardon me, you're right, no, it's not the Nash equilibrium, it's supposed to be the collusive output level. This output here, according to the Nash theory, is the collusive level of output. But I've got agents that aren't colluding. That's the Nash equilibrium. That's a very good question, because I don't actually go into this in this lecture, but into why the Nash theory is wrong. Mathematically, Nash equilibrium theory has no mathematical errors in it. It's only the Marshallian theory that has provable mathematical errors in it. But the Nash equilibrium is also what I call meta-unstable. So the stability is only there if firms know what other firms know. When you take away they don't know what other firms know and they just behave randomly, that is the outcome, and that's the Nash prediction. So you actually, if you want to follow that up, I've got a research paper on that topic linked on my blog, worth having a look at. And of course, by doing what is called collusive behaviour, but they're not colluding. I'm really glad you asked that point. They're not colluding, but they're getting a higher level of profit. Okay? Then the neoclassical one follows. And that's back to my point. Here's just showing there's no collusion going on. This is 3 randomly chosen firms plus the mean. So the mean is the black line. You can see how erratic that is. And here are 3 other firms behaving in very different fashions. No collusion going on. There's no innovation going on. Do I hear you properly? My hearing is being so bad. There's no innovation. This is just absolutely fixed technology. I mean, in a realistic theory of the firm, we should have innovation. You know, but this is just exactly the same cost function, no change through time and production, which is this Marshallian model. So we should actually have innovation. If we had a theory of competitive behaviour, and we're actually talking a genuine theory of competition, I'd want to have a model of how firms innovate, because the main way firms get an advantage over each other is by innovating. Look at the Samsung-Apple court case right now. You know, that's the real world. So we should be modelling that sort of behaviour, but that's not. The Marshallian model doesn't include it, so I'm not modelling it here. And here's the profit levels. Again, I just chose the same three firms at random. Their profit level happens to be higher than the average, which is the black line, but it's miles above the neoclassical prediction. So there's something going seriously wrong here. Well, the answer is what neoclassicals tell you maximise profits does not maximise profits. And a major part of this is because an assumption they make about the competitive model that the demand curve for the individual firm is horizontal is mathematically impossible. There's lots more, and the research paper I mentioned goes into it in great detail. But I'll start with just the Marshallian model. Back when I learned this stuff, they talked about firms being atomistic. They don't use that term anymore. But I'm saying this is non-collusive behaviour. So firms are simply trying to maximise profits without paying any attention to what other firms do or might do. They just react to the market price. And they're also assuming the market demand curve is downward sloping. Well, if that's true, if firms don't react to what other firms do, and if the market demand curve is downward sloping, then any increase in output by a single firm will change the market level of output, and therefore the slope of the demand curve facing the individual firm is exactly the same as the slope of the market demand curve. And in fact, this has been known since 1957. A guy called Joe Stigler, who was staunch neoclassical and a critic of people who tried to attack neoclassical economics back in the 1950s and 60s, wrote this survey paper on pleasure competition for the Journal of Political Economy. Now, it was an invited paper. It was the very first paper in the journal that year. And the Journal of Political Economy might look like a left-wing journal, but it's one of the most conservative journals on the planet, always has been. The Journal of Political Economy and the American Economic Review and the Journal of Economic Theory are all absolutely neoclassically oriented journals. They're not lefty journals at all. And there's the title of the page, and here's footnote 31, where he wrote this particular little proof. He says, let's suppose one firm sells QI, and we want to then work out what the marginal revenue is for the ith firm. So he's got change in the revenue for the ith firm given a change in its output, and expands it out to being price plus the output of the ith firm. And notice what he's applied here. He's applied the chain rule. He said the slope of the demand curve facing the individual firm is the slope of the market demand curve multiplied by how much market output changes given an change in output by one firm. And notice here he says dQi is 1. In other words, an output change by 1 unit by one individual firm will cause market output to go up by the same amount. But they're not colluding, they're not behaving strategically. Okay, that's a leading journal, a leading neoclassical, and somebody who was actually opposing, again, as Friedman was, opposing people who are doing empirical research into how firms actually behave. Now let's look at the intuition behind it in several ways. First of all, if you imagine a whole market demand curve, then there's big P, big Q, and Q plus DQ and P plus DP, or P minus DP. Well, there's little q and DQ, and a little change in the slope there. The slope of that little bit is going to be exactly the same as the slope of the big equation, the big curve. Now what about acting as if the demand curve is horizontal? This is how they do behave. Well, fine, you can say that, but that's irrational, because a firm would know that, or should know, if it knows the market demand curve slopes downwards, then it knows that there's the price set by output level Q, there's the price set by output level Q plus QI, and P of Q plus QI is going to be less than P of Q. So it's a small difference, but it's not zero. And the mistake neoclassical economists have made of treating that small amount as if it's zero, and therefore it can cancel it out. Now, the trick they pull on the textbooks, I call magic. You know what magic is? It's sleight of hand. It's confusing you with something else so you don't actually see what's going on. So what they do is they draw a demand curve like this, and they then zoom in. See the dotted line? They zoom in over a bit of the quantity axis and all of the price axis. So you do it once, zoom in there, and you've suddenly got flatter demand curve. Do it again. Zoom in down there. And there's your horizontal demand curve. See? No problem. Well, what about if you zoom on the vertical and horizontal at the same scale? Well, I'm now zooming on this box here. I'm zooming in a bit of the demand curve in quantity and a bit of the demand curve in price and keeping them roughly proportional. Zoom in there. Downward sloping line. Do it again. Zoom in on that box. Another downward sloping line. Do it again. On that tiny box there. It's still downward sloping. Now I was working with a huge demand curve here. Maximum price 800, minimum 0, minimum quantity 0, maximum 10 billion units, whatever it was. Across that range from 2.91 to 2.94 billion, the price falls from 509 to about 506. I reckon I could spot the difference. $3 effectively. So that's a sleight of hand. What fools you to believe you can actually get a horizontal demand curve out of a downward sloping one. But it's a trick. Now what about assuming price taking behaviour? Well yeah, but that's irrational. So you can get a horizontal demand curve or firms behaving as if it's horizontal if you're willing to assume that firms are irrational profit maximisers. Now you've been told this is all about rational behaviour. So the rational belief is that they slope downwards. The irrational is that they're horizontal. So you depend upon having irrational behaviour to get the outcome you want. Again, the same old thing. They want to get rational to rational. Sorry, you get rational to irrational. So marginal revenue is less than price. And the demand curve for a single firm isn't horizontal. So what you've been taught is a fallacy. And it's been known as a fallacy since 1957. So is there any way to justify it? Like, could I use an as-if defense for the teaching and say, well, yeah, we realise that this isn't quite right, but we're teaching as if it's right because it's too complicated for those silly little undergraduate students to understand. Only us advanced mathematicians can do it, so we teach it even though we know it's wrong. Well, that's what Stigler thought he did back in 1957. Because he'd actually found this, I'm pretty certain, by accident when he was trying to explain the theory. But having found a curly bit, he wanted to re-establish the theory and show that you did ultimately get perfect competition if you went far enough. So what he said is, let's actually look at this as a convergence process. The more firms you add, the closer you get to perfect competition. So he said profit maximisers equate marginal cost and marginal revenue. So here's marginal revenue for the ith firm. And I'm now going to multiply that by P over P times Q over Q. So I'm not changing anything in the second term there. So I'm saying it's equal to price plus QI times P over P times Q over P, Q over Q times dP dQ. So I haven't changed the last term at all. Then define QI to actually be big Q divided by N. And having done that, I've now got the possibility to cancel 2 of the Q's out. And I've got 1 over N turning up there. And I've got a spare Q. Rearrange the P's and Q's, and I now can say that this whole thing here with those two cancelling and P over P there, I can make that P times 1 over N times Q over P. So now what I've got is this messy expression. See how hard he's working at this stage to try to get back the result he wants. Well, that bit at the end there, 1 over N times Q over P times dP dQ, that's the inverse of the elasticity of the market demand curve. Not the individual firm now, the market elasticity. So he said you can rewrite the whole expression now to be the marginal revenue for the ith firm is market price plus market price divided by the number of firms in the industry multiplied by the elasticity of demand. And he triumphantly says at the end that this last term goes to zero as the number of firms rises indefinitely. So he said we converge to perfect competition. Okay, it's just a question of adding more firms. Now that is true. There's nothing mathematically wrong with that argument. The only problem is it assumes that equating marginal cost and marginal revenue maximises profits. But I've just shown you that it's not. So there's another formula that actually does maximise profits. So the neoclassical argument is that if you equate your marginal cost and your marginal revenue, you'll maximise your profits. That's what you're told all the time. And that's solving what's called an ordinary differential, because you're finding where the derivative of your profit relative to your output is zero. But the profits you make as a firm in an industry with more than one firm in it don't just depend on what you do. It depends on what other firms do as well. Now, you can't control the firms. You might not even know what they're doing. You don't have to collude. You simply know that the profits you make are going to depend upon your actions and the actions of other firms in the same industry, as well as the demand curve and other issues as well. So the real profit maximisation rule is not a partial ordinary differential, it's a total differential. The real point where you maximise profits is where the derivative of your profit relative to total industry output is zero. Okay. The maths you haven't done before, but it's not too complicated. Now, of course, I get told firms can't know that. And I thought that was true when I first worked this out myself. But in fact, yes, they can. Just imagine you've got this really profit-oriented boss. That, by the way, that little graphic, which came from Microsoft, PowerPoint illustrations, bears a striking resemblance to Kerry Packer. Yeah. I didn't say that, but I'll one extra mark for the final exam and one off for being sexist. Okay. Okay. Actually, I had a lot of fun watching tweets this week. There's a journalist, Heidi Moore, who's been writing all the time about how spunky she finds all the male swimmers to be. It's been hilarious watching the sexism get inverted on Twitter. Very funny. Okay, so the economist says, okay, I'll just equate marginal revenue and marginal cost, not a problem. But the mathematician says, well, that's an interesting problem. I've got to set the total derivative profit equal to zero. So those are the two approaches. Now, you've seen equating marginal cost and marginal revenue doesn't work. So I'm going to take you through what the mathematician does. And if you want to see a complete proof, you click on that little box down there. I won't do it now because it took me off to YouTube. But that will show you how to do the complicated proof. But here's the basic idea. The total differential is where the change in revenue minus cost is zero relative to total industry output. What you've got to therefore find is where this expression, that's the mathematical expression for a total derivative, is equal to zero. And what it involves is solving, I think I could do this with the neoclassical first, pardon me. Okay, the neoclassical says solve that. And notice the difference between the two is that's with respect to Q and that's with respect to QI. That's the only change I'm making here. Now, the total differential involves doing this calculation n times. There's supposed to be n firms in the industry. So n times, you're going to work out where this little term, which is the partial derivative of your profits compared to the output of another firm, where once and only once it's going to be you that you're comparing yourself to. That's the change in the ith firm's profit given change in the jth firm's output. And you do it n times for all the firms in an n firm industry, but once it's going to be you. So let's go through it. What happens? Well, use the product rule. You can expand the revenue part of that to price times the change in output of the ith firm given a change in output by the jth firm. That's the first bit. The market price P times how much a given firm's change in output changes your output. Now, of course, we're talking non-collusive behaviour. N minus 1 times is going to be zero. Another firm changes its output. You don't change your output because it changed its. That would be strategic behaviour or collusive behaviour. So it's going to be 0 n minus 1 times, because it'll be equal to 0 each time it's not u, but once it's going to be dqi divided by dqi, which would be 1. So once you're going to get price out of it. It's going to be p once. This bit is your output, qi, times how much the change in the output of a single firm changes the market price. Now I've just shown you that you can substitute the slope of the market demand curve for the change in the output of the single firm using the chain rule, or product rule, no, chain rule. So with n firms, you're going to get n instances of qi times dp dq. The cost component is how much your cost change given an output change by the jth firm. Now, n minus 1 times is going to be 0, and once it's going to be your marginal cost. So, maximum profit is where P plus n times your output times the market demand curve slope minus once 1 instance of your marginal cost is equal to 0. But the neoclassical formula says it's where P plus a single time your output multiplied by the market price minus your marginal cost equals 0. They've missed out n. That's missing. Their formula's wrong. Now you then solve the formula and you get a true profit maximizing point, and that's where I got my predictions, which were accurate as you saw from that simulation. So we have an incoherent theory of the firm. The whole distinction between monopoly and perfect competition is based on a fallacy. Now, it could still be true that monopolies are bad and competitive firms are good, but I expect it's more likely something in the middle. If you think about the most creative industries on the planet, they tend to be like the computer industry, the gaming industry, car industry, and so on, where there are huge firms at one extreme and tiny firms at the other. You know, in the computer industry, you go from Microsoft and IBM down to the corner shop assembling computers out of components from Foxconn. In the car industry, you go from General Motors and Renault and the big companies like that down to Maserati. Okay. Huge range of output levels, diversity of consumers they're supplying. That tends to be the best industries, not this extreme of monopoly versus competition. It's almost impossible to find any industry that suits those taxonomies. This is one of the other crazy things about neoclassical theory that Thorstein Veblen explains very, very well. The guy writing back at the turn of the 19th century, by the way, just on the cusp of the 20th century. He said that all the stuff in neoclassical theory is a taxonomy. It's like classifying animals before we knew about evolution. He said when almost no animal will fit into the classifications. Find a monopoly, find a competitive firm, find an industry which has a sole monopoly. Find an industry which has just competitive firms. You won't find them. The vast majority of industries don't fit into either of those extremes, not even oligopoly. So it's a useless theory. And all the arguments about welfare being damaged by monopoly are irrelevant to the real world, as it happens, and in fact wrong in a welfare sense, because if their theory actually described the cost that firms face, which it doesn't, another issue I haven't gone into in this course, but I cover in other lectures, then what they call the deadweight loss due to monopoly is actually the deadweight loss due to competition. And if you actually look at the potential marginal cost of a few large firms versus a lot of small ones, you're likely to find the larger firms that have lower marginal cost. So the whole basis of comparing industries that way just disappears. And the worst thing for the theory, and this points out why they're so rabid at wanting to hang on to the idea of price equal to marginal cost and the whole notion of perfect competition, even given how clearly unrealistic it is that they don't have perfect competition, you can't draw a supply curve. So I've shown you the demand curve doesn't look anything like what the neoclassical theory says, but at least it exists. If you actually had Robinson Crusoe and Man Friday and you added them up, you get a squiggly line. You would actually be able to draw a demand curve. But you can't draw a supply curve. Now here's the explanation as to why. This is Mankiw's crappy graphics again. So here he's showing horizontal price function for the individual competitive firm. There's the amount of producers at one price. There's the amount of producers at another price. there's the third price, therefore the marginal cost curve is the firm supply curve if and only if price equals marginal cost. Now, if price doesn't equal marginal cost, you get this sort of outcome. Here's an industry with rising aggregate marginal cost, but I've now got a downward sloping demand curve and therefore a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. So there's one price and quantity combination. So there might be 1 point on your supply curve. Then we draw in another demand curve with a different slope, and therefore a different marginal revenue curve. Work out its point of intersection, scale up to the demand curve, work out a new P2 and Q2. So we've got a second price. What's our supply curve look like? Slopes down. I can get any shape I like for the supply curve. The supply curve doesn't exist because each point of supply depends upon the shape of the demand curve. So you don't have the independent supply and demand function anymore that's an essential part of Marshall's theory. So you can't get supply and demand analysis. So that's why they're so rabid about hanging on to perfect competition. You couldn't understand why your textbooks and your lecturers who believe this stuff. And there's some people here who do and some who don't, obviously. In my university, thank God there are quite a few who don't believe it. But the reason that ones who do believe it do it because they don't believe it, they can't do supply and demand analysis. So even not knowing the problems about modelling individuals the way they do, and not knowing the aggregation, even if they could get to those two stages, unless they can get an independent supply and demand curve, they can't do supply and demand analysis. So goodbye their entire analysis. So, and then again, it's that dead weight loss stuff. It's profit maximisation that causes that, if that actually ascribes the firm's cost, which of course they don't believe it does. So, and if you look at the fact that the cost curves don't have to be the same, then it's quite easy to show, even using a conventional theory, that a monopoly can produce at a lower price and a higher quantity if their costs were different. There are conditions attached to the cost being the same which are equally absurd. I haven't gone through those, but they're in that research paper I mentioned here. So this isn't particularly rational, is it? And we start with the idea of a rational consumer and found that it was impossible. We then take a look at demand curves and show you can't derive them. Finally, they were ignoring problems in supply as well. So we are an enormous distance from what is truly rational behaviour. You can't use what you've learned in economics so far as a way of defining what is rational. So what I'm going to do next week is go through all this and show what can actually be defined as rational behaviour. And it'll be very different to what you've learned so far. And this, if you keep on going, you'll cop the mathematics to explain that logic I've shown you beforehand. So that's it for today. I want to say that.